Let me describe what Thursday looked like from the ground in Iran. In the afternoon, Iranian state media reported that Iran's armed forces exchanged fire with the enemy on Qeshm Island in the Strait of Hormuz. Qeshm is the largest Iranian island in the Persian Gulf. 150,000 people live there. It has a water desalination plant. It sits directly in the strait, approximately 25 kilometers from the Iranian mainland. No further details were given. The source of the attack was not identified. The White House and CENTCOM did not respond to requests for comment. Separately, Iranian state media reported loud noises and defensive fire in western Tehran, in the capital city of the Islamic Republic. Not in the strait, not in a military facility, in Tehran, western Tehran. And separately again, explosions were heard near Bandar Abbas in southern Iran. Bandar Abbas sits on the Iranian coast, directly across from Qeshm Island, directly at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz. It is Iran's primary port. It is where the IRGC Navy's Hormuz operations are based. It is where the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, the new government agency Iran created Thursday to tax and vet ships passing through the strait, presumably has its operational offices Qeshm Island, western Tehran, Bandar Abbas. While all three of those things were happening, Pakistan's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Tahir Andrabi told NPR, "Our hope and expectation is for an agreement sooner rather than later." And Iran's foreign ministry said Iran had not yet reached a conclusion and no response had been given to the U.S. side. Explosions in 3 locations, a new government agency to tax ships, a mediator saying soon, an Iranian government saying not yet. I want to spend today explaining what the explosions mean, not just as military incidents, but as evidence of the gap between the diplomatic narrative and the operational reality of this war. Because when explosions are heard in western Tehran and the Iranian armed forces are exchanging fire on Qeshm Island, calling this a ceasefire requires a definition of ceasefire that most ordinary people would not recognize. Let me start with Qeshm, because it is the most significant of the 3 locations, and the one that is getting the least analysis. Qeshm Island is Iran's largest island. At its widest, it is approximately 30 kilometers. It sits in the eastern part of the Strait of Hormuz, between the Iranian mainland and the open Gulf of Oman. Its northern coast faces Bandar Abbas across a narrow channel called the Clarence Strait. Shipping through Hormuz passes either north of Qeshm, through that narrow channel, or south of Qeshm, through the wider part of the strait. The IRGC Navy uses Qeshm as a staging point for its Hormuz operations. The island houses IRGC speedboat facilities, missile batteries, and command infrastructure. When Iran's armed forces say they exchanged fire with the enemy on Qeshm on Thursday, they are describing combat on the island that controls the primary corridor through which America's Project Freedom was trying to escort ships. The enemy is the same phrase Iran used throughout the early phases of the war to describe American and Israeli military forces. Not unnamed attackers, not unknown projectiles. The enemy, that is a specific designation that means foreign military forces. The question of who specifically struck Qeshm on Thursday is unanswered in public. It could be American forces conducting an intelligence gathering or prepositioning operation. It could be Israeli forces, which have been striking Iranian-linked targets throughout the region since the war began. It could be Emirati forces, following Monday's Iranian missile attack on Fujairah. The absence of attribution from CENTCOM and the White House is itself information. When America strikes Iranian territory, it typically announces it with a press release about operational success. The silence suggests either it was not an American operation or it was an American operation that the administration is managing carefully in the context of the deal negotiations. Now let me explain Western Tehran. Because explosions in the capital city during a period described as a ceasefire are a different category of event from explosions near a military island in the strait. Western Tehran is not a military installation. It is a city of approximately 15 million people. Loud noises and defensive fire in Western Tehran means air defense systems activated, and something was either intercepted or the systems were triggered by a perceived threat. The Shahab 3 missile batteries and the Bavar 373 air defense systems around Tehran are positioned to protect against Israeli and American strikes on Iranian command infrastructure. When they fire, it means something was detected incoming. Who would be striking western Tehran while Iran is reviewing a U.S. peace proposal and Pakistan is saying sooner rather than later? The answer that most news coverage is avoiding is this is consistent with Israeli operations. Israel has been conducting its own military campaign against Iranian-linked targets throughout the war, operating under different strategic logic from the American ceasefire dynamic. America is in a ceasefire and reviewing a deal. Israel is pursuing its own objectives in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Iran itself. The Lebanon-Israel ceasefire expires May 17th. 10 days away. Lebanese and Israeli diplomats are scheduled to hold peace talks in Washington this week. Israel is managing its own timeline. Israel striking targets in western Tehran while America is in ceasefire negotiations with Iran would not be the first time Israel has operated in ways that complicated American-Iranian diplomacy. Israel conducted strikes on Iranian territory and Iranian-linked infrastructure throughout the initial phase of the war, including targets that America's Operation Midnight Hammer on February 28th did not specifically target. Israel and America share intelligence but do not always share operational decisions. Israel's strategic objectives, eliminating Iranian nuclear infrastructure, degrading Iranian air defense capability, disrupting IRGC command networks, have not paused during the ceasefire the way America's bombing campaign paused. The Lebanon-Israel ceasefire expires May 17th, 10 days from Thursday. Lebanese and Israeli diplomats are scheduled to hold peace talks in Washington this week. Israel is managing a separate clock from America's Iran deal clock. If Israel believes the Iran deal will produce a regional security architecture that constrains Iran's ability to support Hezbollah in Lebanon, Israel has an interest in the deal happening before May 17th. If Israel believes the deal will leave Iranian military capacity intact in ways that threaten Israel, it has an interest in degrading that capacity before any deal freezes the military situation. Thursday's strikes on western Tehran, air defense infrastructure, and Qeshm Island IRGC Navy facilities are consistent with Israel trying to ensure that whatever deal is reached, it is reached after Iranian military capacity has been degraded to a specific level. This is not a contradiction of the deal. It is Israel shaping the deal's military context before the deal freezes it. And Iran is not publicly attributing. That is significant. When Israel struck Iranian territory in the early phases of the war, Iran announced each strike and responded. Thursday's incidents produced no attribution and no announced retaliation. Iran is absorbing strikes in silence while saying it has not yet reached a conclusion on the peace proposal. That combination, absorbing in silence, reviewing a proposal, is the combination of a government that has decided to negotiate and is managing the military track to avoid derailing the diplomatic one. Bandar Abbas is the third location and the most operationally significant. Explosions near Bandar Abbas on the day that Iran created the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, whose operational offices would presumably be in Bandar Abbas, may not be coincidental. Striking the institutional infrastructure of the Persian Gulf Strait Authority on the day of its creation would be a specific message from whoever conducted the strike. We see what you are building, and we are not accepting it as a fait accompli. Iran said the Bandar Abbas explosion source was not identified. That is not a denial. It is diplomatic silence that preserves Iran's options while the deal review continues. Now, let me explain the Persian Gulf Strait Authority in this context, because its creation on the same day as the Qeshm, Tehran, and Bandar Abbas explosions tells a specific story about what Iran is doing on multiple tracks simultaneously. Iran is being struck in 3 locations on Thursday. Iran is creating a permanent government institution to regulate the waterway it is being struck over. Iran is reviewing a U.S. peace proposal. Iran says it has not yet concluded its review. Pakistan says agreement is coming soon. All of these things are happening simultaneously. The creation of the Persian Gulf Strait Authority on a day of multiple military strikes in Iranian territory is Iran saying, regardless of what is happening militarily, our institutional claim to Hormuz governance continues. We are building the civilian structure while the military conflict runs in parallel. The authority will exist after any ceasefire. It will exist whether the deal is reached this week or next month or never. Iran's institutional position in Hormuz is being built to last beyond the immediate crisis. Lloyd's reported that the authority had emailed it an application form for ships seeking passage. Lloyd's, the world's most significant maritime intelligence and insurance institution, received a formal regulatory communication from a newly created Iranian government body on the same day that explosions were heard near the port that body will presumably govern. That is the war's current state compressed into one day. Formal institution building and active military conflict running simultaneously. Iran sending emails to Lloyds while Iran's air defenses fire in Tehran. And consider the human dimension of the Qeshm Island exchange of fire. 150,000 people live on that island. Fishermen, families, teachers, people who run the shops that serve the IRGC personnel stationed there, the water desalination plant that supplies the island's fresh water. All of that on an island in the middle of a waterway where two military powers have been exchanging fire. The civilians of Qeshm Island did not choose to live at the center of the world's most contested shipping lane during an active military conflict between America and Iran. But they do. And every exchange of fire on Qeshm is absorbed by the population of 150,000 people who live there. Pakistan said sooner rather than later. For those 150,000 people, sooner rather than later is not a diplomatic phrase. It is the timeline on which they find out whether Thursday's exchange of fire was the last one or one of many more to come. Now let me explain what Pakistan's sooner rather than later means in the context of explosions in 3 locations. Pakistan knows about the Qeshm exchange of fire. Pakistan knows about the Tehran defensive fire. Pakistan knows about the Bandar Abbas explosions. Pakistan's mediation team is in direct contact with both sides day and night, as the Prime Minister said. And on a day when all 3 military incidents occurred, Pakistan's spokesperson told NPR that Pakistan's hope and expectation is for an agreement sooner rather than later. A mediator who is aware of ongoing military incidents and who knows from direct contact with both negotiating parties what the state of the negotiations is would not say sooner rather than later if they believed the explosions were derailing the talks. Pakistan's Prime Minister said contact with both sides continues day and night. Pakistan's Foreign Minister spoke with Araghchi by phone on Thursday. And on a day when Qeshm Island exchanged fire with the enemy, when Tehran's air defenses fired, when Bandar Abbas heard explosions, Pakistan's spokesperson told NPR that hope and expectation is for an agreement sooner rather than later. That combination can only be explained in one of 2 ways. Either Pakistan is wrong, the incidents are more serious than they appear, and the deal is actually further away than Pakistan's optimistic framing suggests, or Pakistan is right. The incidents are being managed by both sides as understood exchanges within the context of deal-making, and the diplomatic trajectory is intact despite the military activity. Pakistan's track record in this war is the more accurate of the 2. Pakistan said formal talks were hosted in Islamabad and that something substantive was discussed, and that turned out to be the beginning of the proposal exchange process. Pakistan said Iran was reviewing the U.S. proposal before Iran publicly confirmed it. Pakistan said getting close to finalizing when most analysis said the 2 sides were far apart. Pakistan's read of the negotiations has been more accurate than American or Iranian public statements throughout. When Pakistan says sooner rather than later on a day of explosions, the correct interpretation is to take Pakistan's word over the surface appearance of the military incidents. And here is the most specific piece of evidence for that interpretation. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi spoke by phone with Pakistan's Foreign Minister Dar on Thursday. That call happened after the Qeshm exchange of fire, after the Tehran defensive fire, after the Bandar Abbas explosions. Araghchi called his Pakistani counterpart on a day when Iran's territory was being struck. He did not publicly threaten escalation. He did not announce suspension of the peace proposal review. He called the mediator. That is what a government that has decided to make a deal does when it absorbs military strikes during the final approach to that deal. It manages the military dimension privately and maintains the diplomatic channel publicly. Now let me explain why that is normal rather than paradoxical. Every major military conflict that has ended with a negotiated agreement has included this period, the phase where combat continues while the deal is being assembled and where both sides intensify military pressure precisely when the deal is closest. The Korean War ceasefire on July 27, 1953 was preceded by months of fighting that intensified as both sides tried to improve their territorial position before the line was drawn. The Vietnam ceasefire in January 1973 was preceded by the Christmas bombing campaign of December 1972, when America dropped more bombs on North Vietnam in 12 days than in any previous period of the war. The Camp David Accords in 1978 were negotiated against the backdrop of continued Israeli-Palestinian military skirmishes. The Oslo Accords were negotiated in secret while both sides conducted public military operations. The Dayton Accords ending the Bosnian War were reached in November 1995 after NATO bombing of Bosnian Serb positions in August and September. In every case, the final military pressure and the final diplomatic progress were not opposites. They were the same phase of the same process. Thursday's explosions in Qeshm, Tehran, and Bandar Abbas are consistent with this pattern. Whoever struck those locations, American forces, Israeli forces, or some combination, was trying to ensure that when the deal's terms are agreed, the military reality on the ground is as favorable as possible. Each strike on Qeshm Island IRGC Navy infrastructure makes the IRGC's post-deal Hormuz operations slightly less capable. Each strike on Iranian air defense in western Tehran degrades Iran's ability to threaten Israeli operations in the Lebanon-Israel context, which has its own ceasefire expiring May 17th and its own peace talks in Washington this week. Each strike near Bandar Abbas creates pressure that may influence the final terms of the deal's Hormuz chapter. The pattern has a name in negotiation theory: competitive pressure as a path to agreement. Both sides fight to improve their position while negotiating toward a deal. The deal that emerges reflects the military reality that exists when the fighting stops. Thursday's explosions are improving someone's military reality before the ceasefire that Pakistan says is coming sooner rather than later. And then there is Rubio. The Secretary of State of the United States was at the Vatican on Thursday to meet Pope Leo XIV, whose opposition to the Iran war has led to direct conflict with the American president. Rubio said the meeting was not aimed at improving relations between the Vatican and Trump, but the meeting happened. A senior American official sat across from the Pope while explosions were happening in Iran, and Pakistan was saying agreement soon. A Secretary of State who believes the deal is months away does not find time to meet the Pope on the same day as multiple Iranian strikes. Rubio at the Vatican is American diplomatic preparation for an announcement that is being made into an international context that includes the Pope's moral authority. If the deal is announced in the next few days, the Rubio-Pope meeting becomes the visual evidence that America sought broad international support before announcing, including from the institution that has been its most vocal theological critic. Pakistan said sooner rather than later. The deal's in the room. The explosions are the last round before the whistle. Watch whether Iran attributes any of the Thursday incidents over the next 24 hours. Attribution is the decision about whether to escalate or absorb. Iran has been absorbing throughout the ceasefire period. Thursday's absorption, not attributing, not retaliating while creating the Persian Gulf Strait Authority and saying the review continues, is consistent with an Iran that is days from a deal. If Iran attributes Qeshm to America or Israel on Friday, the diplomatic track is under serious stress. If Iran says nothing about attribution, the deal is intact and Pakistan's sooner rather than later will prove accurate. Watch Thursday's end for Friday's beginning. Let me add one more piece that makes Thursday's picture complete. Saudi Arabia officially refused to support Trump's Project Freedom. An official in Saudi Arabia told the Associated Press that the kingdom would not back the use of force to reopen the strait. Saudi Arabia, America's closest Arab ally, the country whose oil infrastructure depends on Hormuz, the country most directly hurt economically by the strait's closure, said no to military force as the solution. Saudi Arabia's refusal places the kingdom in the same position as Pakistan. Push for the deal, not the military option. Saudi Arabia is saying to Washington, we want the deal because the deal is the only path that is acceptable in the region. Military force creates the kind of regional instability that is worse for Gulf state interests than the current economic disruption. And Saudi Arabia knows something about Thursday's explosions that it is not publicly saying. Saudi Arabia maintains deep intelligence relationships with both Iran and America, and with Israel. Saudi Arabia knows who struck Qeshm. Saudi Arabia knows what the Western Tehran defensive fire was responding to. Saudi Arabia's refusal to support Project Freedom on the same day as 3 incidents in Iranian territory is Saudi Arabia saying, we know what is happening, and the path forward is the deal, not the next round of escalation. The explosions are the last round before the deal. Saudi Arabia knows it, Pakistan knows it, Iran knows it. The 150,000 people on Qeshm Island are waiting for the deal to know it. Explosions in Tehran, exchange of fire on Qeshm, blasts near Bandar Abbas, Iran creating a government agency to tax Hormuz shipping, Pakistan saying soon, Saudi Arabia saying no to force, Araghchi calling the mediator after the explosions. The war and the deal are running in the same cities on the same Thursday. One of them is ending. If you found this useful, push back on it in the comments. I will see you in the next one. Watch whether Iran attributes any of the Thursday incidents over the next 24 hours. Attribution is the decision about whether to escalate or absorb. Iran has been absorbing throughout the ceasefire period, managing each incident within the diplomatic frame rather than announcing it as a casus belli. Thursday's 3 incidents, Qeshm, Tehran, Bandar Abbas, were described by Iranian state media without attribution. If Friday brings attribution to America or Israel, the diplomatic track is under serious stress. If Friday brings Iran's formal response to Pakistan, the 3 incidents were absorbed within the deal's final approach, one or the other, not both. Thursday's end is Friday's beginning. Explosions in 3 Iranian cities. Pakistan saying sooner rather than later, the deal is coming into a world that is still being bombed.